Well, one thing that's interesting about bears and other carnivores is that when they are presented with something that's a disturbance, they can almost always just walk away from it, and that's what they do. But in their life cycle, you have this one time when they cannot do that, and that's when they're denning. That's also when the whole future of that species is hanging on that event. Obviously, if birthing and reproductive survival is compromised, then that alone can take out an entire population. They start about late November. They go in there, the mothers dig this den, which is just barely bigger than their body. They sit in there and they sleep as the cubs develop. They're born around the 1st of January. They're like little puppies. They have very short white hair on them. Their eyes are closed. The cubs then born at 1 kilogram will stay at the den site in northern Alaska. About the 1st of March is when bears will start to come out. When they first come out, they're just the cutest little things. They'll weigh about, maybe by then, about 4 or 5 kilograms. And they just come out and they just race around the outside like they've just discovered this whole new world. And they're just full of energies, and the mothers just sit there and kind of watch them. They're fairly sedate, don't move a lot. But then they'll go back in the den and come in and out for anywhere from a day to a month. It depends on the individual mother and I suspect her experience and how big the cubs are and so forth. What's really quite interesting about denning, though, is that the mothers and the cubs spend 98 to 99% of their entire hours, once the den opens, inside the den. They very rarely come out. The whole purpose of the time at the den is for the cubs to get bigger and bigger and bigger. They're drinking their mother's milk. It's 30% milk fat. And so the cubs are growing, growing, growing. All this time the mother's not feeding. So there's a huge draw, attraction to leave, but apparently growing the cubs bigger is the primary purpose for remaining at the den site. If it weren't important, they'd be gone. We have, on any given year, across the, the coast of the North Slope, we might have 4 or 5 that come into areas that are even accessible by snow machine. So I know that I can get 1, 2, 3 dens from radio tracking. They have radio transmitters on them, and we can locate them by satellite. And then once we get an approximate fix, I can come in there with a handheld unit and pinpoint that. That's one way. Another way is that we look for a loss of heat through the snow surface using forward-looking infrared.
FLIR stands for forward-looking infrared. It's a pretty fascinating technology, and what it does is it's able to tell temperatures of surfaces down to, I think it's something like 1/10 of a degree centigrade. And so we fly over the dens and look at the surface of the snow and look for warmer bits of snow, and could indicate that there's a bear underneath there heating that snow.
There she is. I can see her moving. I'm pretty sure.
Well,
Do you see the 2 ears and the nose looking at us?
Oh,
You can
yeah,
see her.
there she is. There's the
she's
bear.
looking out.
After we fly over with FLIR, we're able to more precisely come up with the location of the den using hand FLIRing units. And we put those in our coat and ride snowmobiles out to the den site, and then pull these FLIR units out of our coat and look at the side of the hill to see if there's any polar bear dens there. And by using that, it helps to narrow down the location. We just put our recording camera on that and let it roll. We study polar bear dens, the mothers coming out of these maternal dens, by setting up a high-definition camera about 100 yards in front of the den opening. And we just set it up with about a week's worth of batteries and hit record, and we ride off and let them just sit there outside the den structure and see what they see. They're just cute little fur balls that like to roll around in the snow and play with their mother, so they're fascinating.
Of course, polar bears are one of the key species here that's taking the brunt of climate change, since they live on ice. And with a warming climate, it's destined to become a problem for an animal that's intimately tied. The USGS started work in the 1980s on bears in the Beaufort Sea. At that time, approximately 50% of all the dens were out on the sea ice. So mothers would actually go into a den on sea ice, and when they came out 3 months later, they might be 500-600 miles from where they actually went in, because the whole pack is moving, which is pretty amazing. So what has happened over those years, since 1982 to now we see a large movement of bears off of the sea ice. They can sense that the ice is too thin, it's too unstable to den up on, and so they move inland until they find something that's stable. And so, number one, we're seeing them move off the ice. Unfortunately, at the same time that these northern Alaska bears are looking for dens, we have now a petroleum crisis basically globally. Now these formerly abandoned areas are being redeveloped, reworked, and so now we have this intense oil exploration and development and processing going on. So along that coastal area, it kind of sets the stage for a potential problem. You've got bears looking for areas where they can den, and you've got oil companies that are looking for oil. So that's a problem. Another problem is that, of course, as ice becomes less in its total extent, we're going to end up with bears, much like Hudson Bay here, where they can't go out to the ice in the summer. And so we're going to have bears that wander the beach. That doesn't happen in Alaska. Typically, as the ice recedes from the continental shelf, the bears go out with it. But as the ice goes further and further to where it's over areas that have low to no productivity, hence there will be no seals, there's nothing for the bears. So it's all around pretty bad situation for bears if the current trends continue, which most of the scientists agree will. I think what kind of yanks at your heart, I mean, for one thing, they're on their own, they've been doing fine. All of a sudden, these things are in a situation where there's no end point that's good, and they're going to end up with a very dire circumstance. I think for a lot of us, it's unacceptable. We're not going to sit back and let that happen. And I think the worst part of it is, it's one thing to watch wildlife suffer because just nature's harsh, but when nature's harsh because humans have pushed it that direction, I think for a lot of us biologists, that's just not acceptable. And so I think on a personal level, it just hurts to see that a lifestyle that is really causing trouble comes back in a very personal way. So I think that's what keeps me on task there.